Great is the Sabbath. It hath been likened to the Messiah of God. And as the Messiah was with the Lord in heaven before the world was created, even so was the Sabbath, which meaneth that there was repose before there was movement, and there was redemption before there was slavery. Now the next day was the 6th day, which is the eve of the Sabbath. And my rabbi bestirred himself at an early hour, and before he began the preparations of the Sabbath, he looked to it that his brothers be occupied at their labors, as was proper. For such order had been wont in his father's day, and in his own what time he abode in the house, and the family was famed for this order from generation to generation. He called unto his brother Jacob, who had taken over the labor from his hands, that he might nourish the family, and he went with him into the carpentry shop, and there he proved and tested him, and looked to the wood wherefrom the wains were to be made, whether it were not too fresh, and therefore easily broken, nor too dry and withered. And he looked to the wheels, that they be strong and well fitted, and the spokes firm and well fastened, and that the reins be loose enough, that they close not perforce the mouth of the ass, or of the ox when it treadeth the grain, that it might be able to eat thereof, as the Torah commandeth. And when he saw that his brothers did their work fittingly and well, according to the reputation of their family, he praised them therefore. Then he took his brother Simon, and went with him into the garden which was in the field, for his brother Simon was the one that had charge of the little portion which was the inheritance of the family. And Simon worked in the garden and in the field that were about the house. And our rabbi saw to it that his brothers observed in their labor all the commandments touching the work of the field, as they are written in the Torah, that they left the corners of the field for the poor of the city to garner, and for strangers. And he inquired likewise whether his brothers set aside the tithe or tenth of the harvest for the priest, according to the commandment. He inquired further whether his brother left the second aftergrowth of the grapes in their little vineyard for the poor of the city, and gathered them not into his cellar. Also, whether he left in the field that which fell under the scythe, which is not to be gathered with the sheaf, but left where it lieth, according to the commandment. And it was the time of the spring, and the wheat stood up in the field, but it was green and hairy, and it bowed devoutly before the wind, and my rabbi blessed it. And he took his brother, and went with him into the small garden about the house, and he saw to it that on every tree, every fig that showed first to be ripe was marked with a bent twig around it, that it might be sanctified for the first fruits, and brought in the right season to the temple in Jerusalem. And the garden was in blossom, and the mother stood in the midst of the green, and digged onions and carrots from the ground, to prepare for the Sabbath meal. And my rabbi said unto her, Mother, do not thou labor, but leave the work for my disciples, for they will come shortly from the city, and they will prepare the Sabbath feast for their rabbi, for such is the commandment concerning disciples and their rabbi. And his mother answered, The commandment and good deed of Sabbath preparation is very great, and the more one laboreth therein, the greater is the fulfillment. And my custom is still as it was in thy father's days, and the fruits which are ripest, and the vegetables, I put aside in the week, and mark them, and gather them on the 6th day for the Sabbath. And he took his youngest brother Judah, and went with him into the stable. Now the youngest had been but a child what time his father had died, and the rabbi loved him beyond all his brothers, for he had been left an orphan in young years, and my rabbi had been as his father, and he called to him, saying, Judah, Tinoki, which signifieth, Judah, my little one, come, lead me to the flock. For the youngest had been charged with the care of the little family flock. And the mother drew from her flock the milk and cheese for the house, likewise woolen garments for the winter nights, and she spun and wove the garments with her own hands. And the flock was small, having but a few sheep and a few goats. And when we came to the flock, the sheep made a close circle about my rabbi, as if they would know him, and they licked his hands and his feet. And he asked concerning the well-being of the sheep, and inquired closely of his brother, whether he listened when he heard the dumb crying of the beasts for water. And his brother answered, The work is well done, and with skill. For have not our forefathers been shepherds from the days of Abraham our father on? And my rabbi said, Thou hast answered well, my son. And as they spoke thus, the disciples returned from the city, and there was with them the woman who had followed after our rabbi from Naim, to wit, Miriam. And when the mother saw the disciples, for they had not all been in the house the night before, she said, Who are these? And my rabbi answered, All these are the souls which I created, and there be not many, but their name shall be legion in the time to come. And the rabbi took the hand of the woman that had come with the disciples, and he led her to his mother, and said, I deliver her unto thee and thy grace. Take her unto thee, for till this day she hath been rejected, and do thou teach her all the commandments which pertain to a daughter of our people. And the woman bowed before the mother, and touched the hem of her garment, and said, I am not worthy to touch with my hands the hem of thy garment, for I am unclean. But the mother raised her from the ground, and said, Arise, my daughter, that is no more unclean which my son hath cleansed. And she said further, It is a great day with me, for not only hath the Lord granted it to me to see the face of my son, but he hath brought before me his disciples which he hath raised, and the souls which he hath made. Is there a mother in Israel as fortunate as I? Now let them go into the stable, and take a sheep, and slaughter it according to the commandments, and prepare it for the Sabbath which approacheth. And thou, my daughter, shalt come with me, and bake the bread, and prepare the lamps. And she took the woman with her into the room, and they took white meal, and kneaded it with oil which she poured forth from a gourd flask. And she took of the dough, and cast it into the fire, sanctifying it thereby unto the Lord. And she began to bake the breads. And the disciples went with Judah into the stall, and took a beast, and slaughtered it according to the ritual and the commandments. And Jacob and Jochanan, the sons of Zebedee, digged a hole in the ground, and lit a fire with straw and wood, and they roasted the beast over the glow of the wood on a spit. For the good deed is of double virtue, if each of the disciples shareth in the labor of preparation of the meal for the rabbi, and each is occupied with the work for the Sabbath. And so the brothers Zebedee turned the sheep over on the fire, and Philip betook himself to the greens, and rubbed the beets. And one brought oil from the market, and dipped fish therein, and rolled them in dough, and baked them over the fire. And Timothy and Jacob ben Halphi washed the outer garments of the disciples, which they had taken off at their labor, that they might not serve their rabbi at table in the clothes wherein they worked, and wherein they had cooked the meal for him. And the clothes dried in the sun, that they might put on fresh garments for the Sabbath. And I worked with the lamps, and prepared the wicks, drawing them fine, that they might not smoke and give forth bad odor. And Andrew worked in the preparation of the wine, for Andrew and I had received learning, and we knew the laws which pertain to the preparation of wines and lamps and oils, and the laws which pertain to the Sabbath. And Simon the Zealot drew water from the well. But Simon Bar-Jonah occupied himself with the rabbi, and prepared the Sabbath bath for him, heating the water, and pouring it into the large jar which stood in a corner of the yard, surrounded and screened off with palm leaves, as is becoming. And he took my rabbi thither, and washed his body, and anointed it, and put his robes on him, and the outer garment with the fringes, which are the zizit, and shod him in sandals, and laid him down upon a couch, that our rabbi might look like an angel of the Lord, who had come down to bless the Sabbath. And when my rabbi lay on his couch, and took delight in the beauty of the world, which was covered with sunlight, and when he beheld his disciples busying themselves with the preparation of the Sabbath, and was filled with joy thereby, there came many townsfolk, and there were among them also such as had great possessions, and they came out of eagerness to see a new thing. And there were among them the poor that came for gifts, for they had heard that our rabbi distributed to the poor the money which he received from the rich. And there came also the blind and lame, but not to be healed by him, for they believed not. But they came too out of eagerness to see a new thing. But no learned men were among them all, for there were no learned in the city, save for the chief elder of the synagogue, and the rabbis, and the overseers of the temple tribute, which were also the members of the little court. And the people stood about, and some of them mocked. And they said to each other, Behold, he hath brought disciples with him. And the lame led the blind, and they stood about us, and spoke mockingly. And the blind asked, Now tell us, hath he not brought with him many camels, laden with cruses of oil? And the lame answered, Nay, we see no camels laden with oil. And the blind asked again, Perhaps he hath brought with him bags of dinars? And the lame answered, Nay, we see no bags of dinars which he hath brought with him. And the blind said, Now look well. And the others answered, We see only poor folk like himself, which he hath brought with him, and they are his disciples, and there is also a woman among them. Then the blind inquired further, But perhaps he hath transported the king's palace hither by magic, for his mother to dwell in. And the lame answered, Nay, we see but the broken house of the family, where it hath always dwelt. Then the blind said further, But mayhap there is a golden table, laden with all manner of good things, sent down from heaven for the celebration of the Sabbath. And the others answered, Nay, no golden table, and no manner of good things, but the disciples roast small fish in oil, as do all the poor, for the Sabbath feast. And still the blind asked, Now tell us, hath he not adorned his mother in royal robes, and with many precious stones? Nay, his mother weareth still the sackcloth clothing of the poor man's wife. And Simon Bar-Jonah called to them and said, Ye blind ones, why stand ye there and make mock? It were better for you to fall to the ground, and stretch out your hands to him, and entreat him to take away your blindness. For salvation lieth in his hands, and he may yet help you, as he hath helped many others that were blind. And the blind answered, Oh, we be not fools, like the folk of other cities. For if he could indeed help, he would help himself first. What, do we not dwell in this city among his brethren? And see we not how they labor in the field, and at the bench, and are as poor as ourselves? Why loadeth he not them with gold? Why bringeth he not to them great treasuries by magic? And the blind and lame mocked the more, and laughed loudly, and they called to my rabbi, Physician, heal thyself. And one of the blind went forth from the circle, and felt with his hands, and sought the rabbi, saying, Where is the man that performeth such wonders? And why doth he not show himself unto us, as he hath done to others? And thus speaking, he came near to my rabbi, and the others cried out with laughter, O thou blind one, flee now, for he hath sent a serpent against thee, and a hole openeth in the ground before thee. And the blind man stood affrighted, and cried, Where? Where? And when the brothers Zebedee saw all this, they left their work of the preparation of the meal, and they said to our rabbi, Rabbi, shall we drive them hence? Why lettest thou these people make mock? And the rabbi answered, I am not come to destroy lives, but to build.